I gave a presentation at OSAC a couple weeks ago on security departments can safely benefit from the new AI tool set, and I thought I would carve that down to give a presentation here today. I hope you find it beneficial. I also updated the AI guide for risk intelligence. If you just Google that, it's a free download. It's 30 pages of practical prompts and tips and safety, security protocols that I think would be very handy for you. I updated a couple portions of that in version 2 of this, which was just published a couple weeks ago. All right, so really kind of big picture, why do you need to start practicing with AI if you're not already and become more adept at it? Really three big reasons. AI is showing few mathematical signs of slowing. I used to say no mathematical signs of slowing, except now some of the brute force approaches to training the big large language models, they are running up against some limits, primarily through just data availability. But that doesn't mean that the generative AI overall is hit an upper limit. There are several different approaches that OpenAI and others are using that are really getting around that limitation. For example, having models focused on specialized topics. And so this will continue on for the foreseeable future. Number two, AI assisted employees outperform other employees. And at the same time, employees that over rely on AI underperform everyone else. So it's really trying to strike that balance of, and we'll talk about that, of how to really use AI when it makes sense in your job. Number three, by learning AI, you better understand the risks associated with it. If you're playing around and having a conversation with ChatGPT and you suddenly think, well, wait a minute, if it can do that, could it do this nefarious thing? And then your mind starts thinking about some of the risks that could come from that. And that's just a good education as we move forward in this new world. So the trick is finding the balance between human and AI tasks. This is borrowed from Ethan Mollick, who wrote a book called Co-Intelligence. There's those tasks that are just me tasks, things that I do well, and I don't need AI's assistance. And if I used AI, it would actually slow me down. That's the majority of tasks that you do now. But there's this middle area called delegated tasks where you can use AI as an assistant and validate that work, and it does help you either make something better or make something faster. And that's what we're talking about today, of kind of how to figure out how to do that. And then there's automated tasks where you just offload it to AI entirely. That's mostly technology companies like we do at Fractal, handling just massive amounts of incoming data and getting it to a place that's manageable for our editors to actually take it from there. Risk plays a role in how much you validate. If you're asking it, well, is it safe to travel to XYZ, and you're using that in your company, you certainly want to validate that response because that's something you want to get right. But if you're asking about the Spanish word for, table, you don't really need to validate that and it gets it right. And so it really is kind of a risk assessment on your part on what you need to validate when you get a response from AI. So the trick is knowing which tasks that AI can do well and cannot do well. This is always changing as models evolve. It's called the jagged frontier. And so the only way to get good at this is to practice because there isn't a book that says, well, if you ask it this type of thing, it will do, this high of quality response. It's always on the move and it changes with how you phrase those prompts. And so really just to get comfortable with things is really the goal here. And there's three tools that I use. From the beginning, I still use ChatGPT as my primary. The 4.0 model is still the best overall model. There's a lot of good second place models out there. My second is the Anthropic Claude, does really well with writing, for example. Now it's starting to do really well with coding. And there's other frontier models out there that do well, like Llama as well. So lots of good, solid choices at a really inexpensive cost, quite frankly. Perplexity is a good AI-powered search engine that I've used before, although ChatGPT has recently added web search, and so I've been using Perplexity less, but it's your own preference on that front. So security best practices, every company that you work for has different policies and different technologies going from one end of the spectrum where it's not allowed at all to all the way to the other where they built their own internal AI platform that you can really just go crazy on. I'm not going to get into all those details because everyone's work is different. I'm going to talk about personal use of AI, and there is a big overlap. 55% of employees say they use their personal AI tools for work. So it does all kind of blend together. So we'll talk about security and using personal use cases of models like ChatGPT. The big risk of AI is similar to you and a bunch of colleagues going out for drinks after work, and you're starting to have a couple beers and talk loudly, and maybe you're talking about some sensitive things at work, but hey, it's the bar you always go to, and there's none of your competitors should be here, but you never know, right? You never know if someone hears you nearby, and if it's someone who can actually understand what the value of that information is and you go and use that information. That's very similar to when you're chatting with a public AI model. You never know if what you're chatting will actually be used in its training and be regurgitated somewhere else. And so it's just a good idea to be careful, even though there really isn't any direct evidence that a specific conversation will surface somewhere else. So, number one, if you are using ChatGPT, for example, in a personal way, it has training on by default. If you're using it for enterprise, it has it off by default. Claude has it off by default, but every model is different. You should go check to make sure that you're not improving the model for everyone, because that's something you don't want to do. And so for ChatGPT, it's under data controls, and there's a little toggle there. So it's a good idea to make sure that you at least double check that you have that off, so you're not training it. And I think the larger models, they're being truthful here, because if they were ever caught doing this, it would essentially spell the end of any enterprise efforts that they have. So also manage those old chat conversations. If you think about your search history when you're using a browser or using Google or whatever you use for search. When you're using an AI and you're having all these conversations and those conversations are being saved, well, that's quite the repository of intelligence that you may not want others to have. And so it's a good idea to go in and either turn that capability off, or you can go in from time to time and delete all those chats out just to kind of keep it clean, good hygiene. It also has a memory feature, which I particularly like on ChatGPT. It'll remember certain things about you so that your subsequent conversations, you don't have to re-explain things. You can turn that off by default if you'd like, but at least go and check it every once in a while to make sure it's not saving some bizarre facts about you. It's supposed to ignore medical chats, for example, if you're talking about some rash that you have, it hopefully would not save in there, but it's a good idea to go in there and double check it. But the bottom line is, don't upload or talk about any company specific private confidential PII. It's just a good idea to avoid that overall, unless you have that, internal model in your company where you're allowed to do that. Some of the techniques that I use is just to anonymize it. So let's say you're a pharmaceutical company and you're considering alternatives to the, Chinese supply chain partners. Instead of saying your name of the company, say the pharma industry, right? So just make it the industry. So if it did happen to get regurgitated at some point, it doesn't matter. It's been anonymized to the industry. Also, if you're talking about a specific company, you can just change the name of the company to like Acme or something and explain that Acme is an XYZ company. If the model you're using is not connected to the internet, it's limited by its knowledge window. I think most people know this, but more and more of the models are adding the internet, but some still do not have it. Like Claude, if you ask Claude, what's the latest on North Korea joining Russian operations in Ukraine? It doesn't know. And at least it will tell you it doesn't know. Sometimes they just won't tell you and they'll act like they know, and then that's not good. But in this case, Claude is pretty good about being open about that. Even if you're connected to the internet, like ChatGPT, for example, if you ask about a source that it does not have access to, it could hallucinate an answer. So what's the top story in NewYorkTimes.com right now? I asked that on election day, and it returned the midterm election day. Because it doesn't know, it just made it up. It got the sense that it was some kind of election day, so it should come back with some kind of election response. It came back with the wrong one. Keep that one in mind. So best prompts are often supported by information you provide either in the prompt or in an upload. I love uploading non-sensitive, non-PII documents. For example, I've attached the Microsoft Digital Defense Report for 2024, which is this huge PDF, which I would never read cover to cover. Please summarize the top takeaways and stick to the information provided. In other words, don't go off and look at news reports about it. Just stick to the document I uploaded. And it does a great job of breaking it all down. And then you can go and ask follow-up questions and say, hey, what are the implications for corporate physical security teams? It'll actually give a very good response, and then you can drill down on different points of it. If you don't understand an element of it, you can ask it to explain it to you. So it's almost like an assisted reading of a report. If it's a report in an area you're not familiar with, it's a really great way to fully understand something without spending too much time. Okay, writing with AI. So rather than have AI write something for you, the best approach is to have it think through how you should write it. If you have AI just consistently write everything for you, people are going to find out. I can tell. I can tell if I know somebody and they send me something that's been AI written. I just know it's different than their voice. And even if it's somebody I don't know, a lot of times I can tell. And so you don't want to be that person, right, in your company that's known for just writing everything with AI, not a good reputation to have. In this case, you can give it a prompt to say, hey, help me think through how I should write something and let me give you some information to help you give me a structure for that. It's a fantastic approach to think through how to write in advance. I also use it though for refining sections of writing where I get stuck, my flow is off. So, hey, please rewrite this or suggest a final paragraph for that. Really helpful. You can also add custom instructions in ChatGPT with add your writing style so it gets a little bit closer to what you are. So summarizing with AI, we built a summarization tool in Factal, and I learned a few things from this because I tested it hundreds of times, and I found some common errors it makes that go beyond hallucination. I thought I'd share here. So, for example, you say, hey, summarize a story from NJ.com about a food delivery worker found with a legal gun, according to police. Well, what it does is it responds with a nice summary, but it strips out all the attribution to police. And so basically, it convicts the person. So if you're a journalist or a lawyer, you understand attribution is really critical here. And it does this pretty consistently. So keep an eye out for that dropped journalistic attribution when you're summarizing information. It also gets confused sometimes with timing, especially if there's gaps in the information it has. Sometimes it says it gives you the sense that an event is still happening, even though it's concluded. It's spurious correlation. You tell it to summarize a bunch of crime events. It'll in some cases try to link them together, even though they're completely separate in nature. Speculative leaps. A single protest might become a backlash, even though it's just a single protest, and that's all it is. An escalation fallacy, which is this: if you give it a lot of recent information about a conflict, especially, it just assumes that the conflict has escalated because it has all this new information. So these are some of the things to watch for. So it's a good critical eye to have as you use AI. Oh, by the way, I should say, in each of these cases, this is what humans do. If you ask humans to tell stories, they do all these things. And so really the AI has kind of learned the human bad habits of this. Researching with AI, ChatGPT does have this new, web search built into it. So you say, hey, what's the latest? Can you provide an update on security situation in Mazatlan? This is what it looks like. I did this a couple of weeks ago. And so the first two results, it sources to the State Department. So fantastic. And the third one is as an older story out of the Mazatlan Post, not really relevant. So whenever you do this, check the sources and check the timing of the sources because you don't get to pick which sources it goes and searches for, which is really the downside here. And so it'll oftentimes go find some spurious things that you might not want or some older sources that are no longer relevant. So just keep an eye on that. It does list them all out for you there. Image analysis, this is really just fascinating, so I thought I'd share it. Ethan Mollick again, he said, he asked Claude, where do you think I am? And gave this photo. And Claude said, it looks like you're in an airplane. And well, that was correct. And then he sent a second photo and said, well, which kind of plane is this? And it said, well, based on the overhead panel design with the blue LED indicators and the specific style of air vents and reading lights, this appears to be an Airbus 320 family aircraft. Well, that is correct. It's pretty wild. You combine the geolocation technologies are getting better, recognizing things that have already been photographed at a place. And now AI can really deduce what things are based upon the images and kind of combine those together. And it gets really interesting. AI detection with AI. I wonder how many of you might have thought that photo I shared earlier was a little bit suspicious. Well, to me, it was the froth on that beer in front of her was it's not level, kind of odd. Everything else looked pretty good. Her smile's a little bit off, maybe her eyes a little bit off. But yes, I made that photo in Midjourney. If you run it photos through AI detection these days, you can just run it through tools until you get the answer you want. The margin of error is great enough still, unfortunately, where you can always really kind of work around it. However, there is this tool called truemedia.org that is pretty good. It's out of Seattle. It's free. And the difference is they run it through multiple models. And so they then present the results from all these different models and tools together and let you decide if this is something that's suspicious or not. In this case, it said, hey, the likely source is Midjourney. So it's been pretty good, and so I'd recommend that, especially since it's free and widely available. I do think that moving forward, though, the big opportunity, although it has not scaled there yet, is media provenance. The C2PA folks are really the protocol that's catching on here. They've got the big social platforms, minus X. They've got some big news organizations, camera manufacturers, Adobe, which has Photoshop. And so what they do is they attach an encrypted file to photos and videos that take you through the whole provenance cycle from the moment it's photographed to when it goes through Photoshop and what happens in Photoshop. Was it just, did it make a material change or just change the brightness of the image? And so once this scales, we'll be able to say, hey, this photo originated from X, and now we can trust it more. I think it's a better, more sustainable approach into the future of being able to do this.